Good morning, everyone. I welcome you all for this web meeting. 2013 அன்று இந்த கட்டிடத்தில் இந்த மாமலம் தியானமயம் ஆரம்பிக்கப்பட்டது. நேற்றுடன் இது 6 ஆண்டு நிறைவு பெற்று 7ஆம் ஆண்டை நோக்கி அடியெடுத்து வைத்திருக்கிறது. திரு அசோகன் சார் அவர்கள் இந்த 6 ஆண்டு நிறைவுக்காக ஒரு வாழ்த்து செய்தியை அனுப்பியிருக்கிறார்கள். 26/1/2019 மாமலம் தியானமய சேவை அன்பர்கள் சென்னை. அன்புடையீர், இன்றுடன் மாமலம் தியானமய மையத்திற்கு சொந்த இடம் அமைந்து 6 வருடங்கள் ஆகிறது. அன்பர்களை பற்றி அப்பா காணும் கனவுகளை நிஜமாக்கும் நேரம் வந்துவிட்டது. இறைவன் வரும் தருணம் என்று பகவான் குறிப்பிட்டுள்ளதை அன்னை அதிர்ஷ்டம் தரும் தருணமாக இந்நன்னாளை எடுத்துக்கொள்ளலாம். நீங்கள் மலர்ந்தால் மையம் மலரும் என்று நம்பும் அன்பன் திரு என் அசோகன். Thank you. Mr. Garry Jacob sir is going to introduce his book, The Book. It's a novel written by Garry Jacobs. I just give a brief note about the book. He will give the introduction in a speech. The book is a spiritual thriller, a journey to self-discovery and an adventure of consciousness, a revelation of occult truths and a practical guide for higher accomplishment. This novel presents basic principles of Sri Aurobindo's life divine, the character of life and accomplishment. So he has written the book based on Sri Aurobindo's principles and the occult truths. I request Sri Garry Jacobs to speak on the topic. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
I never thought that I would be coming to the center to speak about this book. And maybe when you know more about it, you may understand why. But I'm very, very happy for this opportunity. And I'll try to explain why I'm so happy too. I think it'd be helpful if I give you some background on why the book was written and how it was written, for what purposes it was written. And that may also explain why I never thought of coming here to talk about it. But I'm just curious before I start whether anybody here has read the book or any part of the book. Can you say? Attempted, not completed. Kind of like life divine. Attempted and not. Most people who have attempted are not completed, right? Good. Well, keeping that in mind, I will assume that nobody knows anything about the book. And I am challenged the way I was when I started talking about Life Divine, which is 1,072 pages. This one depends on the edition, how many pages it is, but it is 420,000 words, which is at least 800 or 900 pages, depending on the size of the book. And so I have some difficulty figuring out what to say in a 2-hour talk. So I decided the best thing is not to think about it in advance and to tell it as a story, as it is a story, and see if I can make that as meaningful as possible to you. Most of you anyway know that I came here because a book fell off the shelf when I was in California. And the main theme of this novel is about a book that fell off the shelf. In that case, it was a book about Sri Aurobindo, Sri Aurobindo or the Adventure of Consciousness by Satprem, which brought me to India. In this case, the book is really Life Divine. But when I named it the book, I really had in mind Life Divine, but it's not exclusively Life Divine. What I tried to do was really cover the essential knowledge that I learned, not only from Sri Aurobindo and Life Divine, but from Appa over 35 years before I wrote the book. So I have put a lot more in there. Rather, Life Divine gives all the principles. Appa gives all the application in life that makes it live and real to us. So I combine them both together. This is not supposed to be a philosophy. It's supposed to be a story with a practical relevance. Actually, I said in the cover of the book, the full title of the book is The Book, The Spiritual Individual and the Living Organization. The second part, the spirit, was the title that Appa gave, because he wanted this to be a book that appeals to the Westerner to understand really what individuality is and how to develop individuality, and to understand how this knowledge is relevant in life, particularly in business, to creating a living organization, because he spent so many years on the application of this to business. Then I added another subtitle to it, Codex for the Infinite Game. Codex is a word that kind of like means key or formula. And the infinite game is something that a Westerner would probably understand more than if we say Leela, because the central core message of Life Divine is that life is an evolving divine play and an adventure. And the aim and goal of that adventure is delight of existence. And in that sense, probably adventure is a better word than game. The reason I wrote the book was I came to India in 71, I met Appa in November 72, and after about 5 or 7 years, maybe 10 years, I don't remember exactly, he told me, you should write an autobiography. I said, I don't know why I should write an autobiography or who would read that autobiography. I'm going to write any book about my personal experience, it should be a book about my experience with you. He said, no, I don't want you to write a book about me. I said, I have no life. I can't write about my life by leaving out the main character. So I postponed for a long time. After 10 years, he renewed this. By that time, life was expanding. I was traveling internationally. He said, you must write an autobiography, the story. I still said, I don't think anybody will be interested in it. I repeated this. Then again, 10 years later, this is about 2002, 2003, he said the same thing. So I tried a few chapters, trying to find a way to write this that would not really be about me, but would be from my personal experience. And then I dropped it. Appa most of you may know about his idea of the decision-making matrix. If not, I'll discuss it later. But how a very simple formula for how to make effective decisions, which is a whole key or summary of the process of accomplishment. Because the whole key to secret of accomplishment, whether it's spiritual accomplishment or in business or in life, is to know the relationship between the inner and the outer, between what we are inside and what life is outside. This concept is not there in the West, and he has made it in a very simple way. So he said, we've talked a lot about computer for the last 30 years. So at some time the idea came up, could we create a computer program for this matrix for decision making and offer it to the world? So myself and Chandrasekaran and Kaushik, who's educated in the States in artificial intelligence, we worked on and off for about a year trying to do this. And the more I tried, the more impossible I concluded that it was. And I tried to explain to Appa why, I'm not saying I was right, but I came to the conclusion that all that they talk about artificial intelligence is thinking of the computer as something independent of the human being, as something almost that can compete or replace the human being. And the more I thought about the way in which we accomplish, the more I realized that the computer is only a tool and an instrument, and it can never be more than that. So we were not able to do it. So then I have been in Europe for 6 years, or for a few years working, and I came back in 2007, June. I was tired from my travels and everything. I didn't immediately have any work to take up. One day I got an idea, well, if I don't know how to do it actually, maybe at least I can do it in my imagination. So I started writing a story about some people who will create a computer program that has the spiritual knowledge in it. And when I wrote the first chapter or two, I had no idea what the story is about or what's going to happen. But I wrote a couple of chapters, and it was an enjoyable recreation for me, and I showed them to Appa. He said, oh, this is really very interesting, please continue. And every day he'll ask me, what have you written? And he'll read it immediately, and we'll discuss it, why did you write and all, and he'll encourage me. And completely unplanned, I spent the next 6 months doing nothing else but writing this novel, morning, noon, and night, when I had the energy for it. And he would read it every chapter until I finished. It was a very enjoyable experience for me for several reasons. One, even if I couldn't write an autobiography about all I had learned from Appa and Shermando and Mother, I could tell it in a story without inhibition. Secondly, I could tell it in a life context that would not be philosophy and abstract principle only, but it would show how this knowledge is so valuable in life. Also, it gave me a way to review all that had happened to me and all that I had learned over a 40-year period. And that review made me appreciate more and more what I had learned over that period, and how many of the things Appa told me in 1972, 73, 74, which were not real or meaningful to me at that time, became so rich and meaningful later. And now I had an opportunity to fully appreciate what I had learned, and to try to put it in a context where I could share it, because one of my frustrations has been I have been given so much, but I don't know how to share it all. And the other reason that I enjoyed writing it so much is I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know what the story was. I didn't know the next stages of the story until I wrote them. So I was like reading somebody else's novel. You're eager to know how it goes on. I was eager to find out how the story progresses and how it ends. And it never occurred to me at that time, never occurred to me until about 10 days ago, that since the book fell off the shelf, my life has been like that. I have never known what was going to happen next. Each chapter was fresh. It never was, I had the whole plot of my life in front of me and I'm leading out my life as intended. It was never like that. My life has been an adventure of life. Life has brought me an adventure. And then I realized that's the way I have written the story. I wasn't conscious of it. These characters who start out don't know what they're doing or where they're going. And life brings them a continuous adventure of self-discovery and human accomplishment. And so in reading it and writing it, I became more conscious of my own experience and what I could learn from that experience. So this is some background on the writing of the book. Now why I'm here, I haven't explained yet. A couple of months ago, I don't remember why, but I started mentioning my book to some of the devotees who were coming to Pondicherry and saying, why don't you read it? I think he mentioned to you, Connie and Sai and Jay Velu and a number of others. After all these years, it's 10 years ago that I wrote the book. And as I said, I really wrote the book with Westerners in mind. Westerners means writing from the context that would be real to them, from the things they were interested in, the questions they have, some of which may not be uppermost in your mind. I wasn't thinking of writing a book for devotees. And then as people started to read the book, Abba was calling me and asking me to discuss the book with him and a group. And the more we discussed it, the more things I realized that were in the book which I didn't even remember, or maybe I wasn't even fully aware of when I wrote them. So, and now a few people outside, some friends who I meet through my work, have started to recommend the book to other people in America and Europe and everything like that, though it's virtually unknown. So I thought we had some very interesting discussions in Bondi about the book. Whenever I take any subject and I discuss it here at Mambalam Center in a meeting like this, I don't know how other people benefit, but I always learn a lot. That's a secret that I've learned. So I thought it would be worth my while to come and talk to you about it. Whether it's worth your while, which I sincerely hope, we'll have to see. But that's my goal. Life Divine was written actually for the first time more than about 100 years ago. It was first completed in 1919, so it's a full 100 years. It was first published in the Arya magazine. The first time it was published as a book was only 1939. And I don't know how many copies, but I'm guessing it was probably a couple of hundred copies at that time. And then it was published again in 1950 and published in the US. I don't know, probably not a very large edition. And it's been published numerous times since then. But in one sense, you can say, Mother said, by the way, in Agenda, and she said it 48 years ago, she said that in 50 years, Sri Aurobindo will be known all over the world. Well, we still have technically 1 or 2 years, and in terms of conscious knowledge, Sri Aurobindo is not known all over the world, to my knowledge. In fact, most of the world doesn't know that a book was written 100 years ago with the knowledge for the next 30,000 years of human experience. And that is really what I understand from this book. And since I came here, I have read a lot more of what, and heard a lot more of what the people today, the leading intellectuals today, think about the world and its future. And I can say, what Sri Aurobindo's written is not 100 years ahead. It is 30,000 years ahead. So if Mother's, I'm very hopeful that what Mother said is going to happen very soon. Imagine him having the patience to write a book 100 years ago, knowing that it may be 100 years or 200 years or 500 years before people wake up and come to understand how valuable it is. How many of us would undertake something that we know will be very much appreciated 500 years later? We get no gratification from that. We do it because we understand that it's necessary. What I have seen, and I'm going to try to illustrate it, I try in the story, is that even if the world doesn't know about life divine, and when I say that, I mean, of course, there are thousands of people who know about Sri Aurobindo, hundreds and thousands who know about him outside of the devotees in here, but who know his thought and really understand his thought. I mean, among those who are students of philosophy or students of human evolution and psychology and everything, or spirituality or religion, the number is relative to the size of the world and the educated population of the world, it's very small. But if you look at the thinking of the world, the ideas in the world that are accepted, that have become part of the mainstream thinking, many of his most important ideas are now accepted by the world without even knowing where they came from. And especially the idea that knowledge is whole, that the only true knowledge is a whole knowledge, a complete knowledge. He talks about integral knowledge. And this whole book is about an integral knowledge. And I see it even in the last 5 years, 10 years, 20 years in the fields I'm working internationally, how this idea is becoming more and more prevalent without people even knowing where it's come from. Over the years, this book is written on 4 levels, because actually life is on 4 levels. It's written as personal story of the characters. It's written about the work they do, which is founding a company and creating some computer programs. I'll tell you a little about the plot so you know what I'm talking about. It's written about the society and how society acts and changes, and the relationship between the individuals, the work they do, and the society in which they live. And it's written about life. And this structuring, this 4 levels, exactly matches what I have spent decades learning from Appa. Because when I first came to India, when I became a member of the ashram, when Mother was there, when I read Life Divine and Synthesis of Yoga and their other books, I had a spiritual knowledge that I had understood, but I did not understand how it relates to life. It sounds humorous or foolish to me now. He wrote the book and he called it Life Divine. One of the first things Appa asked me when we started meeting, he knew me before I used to see him, but we weren't in conversation for more than a year. We used to go to a meditation together, and he said, I see that you're very seriously meditating and having good experiences, but tell me, how does it affect the life around you? I looked at this and I scratched my head. I said, I don't understand the question. When I said I don't understand the question, I could have rephrased it by saying, or what Appa understood is, I don't understand anything. Because if I don't understand that my inner experience in meditation should have an influence on the life around me, I have not understood the first word of Life Divine or Synthesis or what Mother and Sri Aurobindo are doing. Because they did not come here to teach a philosophy of individual spiritual realization. They came here to transform the life of the world and humanity. So I'm telling you, it's possible. I'm confessing to you, but I'm telling you, it's possible for somebody to read all the books, to meet Mother, to live in the ashram, to be working there for 1.5 years, thinking that I know so much, and having missed the very, very first thing. If this is not changing your life, you miss the whole point. And the idea that the spirituality changes the life, doesn't just make you happy inside or prepare you for some great experience, but is a power in life. That spiritual knowledge is a power of accomplishment in life. It never occurred to me I never realized it until Abba started talking to me. And he started not by talking about meditation and supermind and all of those things. He started talking about, can you make life respond? Something you all know. Life respond. Then we had to start from, what is life? Is there something that responds? And he started talking to me about business. And in another one of my brilliant replies to him, I said, I have not come and given up my comfortable life in California and all, come to the ashram in order to learn about business. My father was a very successful businessman. Because I didn't want to live a life like that, I have come here. Because I'm convinced that that's not a life of fulfillment for me, I have come here, and you're talking to me about business. As you can see, I was a very, very receptive disciple. Full of my own nonsense. And we spent years talking about, he said, business is life. And unless you understand how to accomplish in business, you don't understand life. And unless you understand the secret of how to bring the inner in the outer, in work, you have not understood anything that Mother and Sri Aurobindo are talking about. And we spent a number of years on it, and some of you know, 10 years later, we wrote a couple of books that were published in the US. I became a business consultant. I began applying this. We applied it in so many companies. That was one line of thought which you'll see in the book. And it explains why I wrote a book about the living organization. That was actually the title that Appa wanted to give to the book that was published in the US. but the publisher decided to change the name. He really wanted a book because the living organization is only possible when the inner consciousness of the human beings in the organization learn how to express it in the outer world. And that is the future of life in the world and accomplishment in the world. So it's not really a book just about business management, it's a book about human accomplishment. And then after that, he started talking about Indian development. Agriculture, industry, exports, this and that. I don't know anything about Indian development. And he sent me to the editor of the Hindu, and we started writing articles. I wrote about 50 articles in the Hindu main page during the 70s. Of course, all the ideas were Appa's. Appa said if he goes there, the editor won't listen because a Westerner has gone there. He thinks it's great wisdom. Even one of Appa's friends wrote to him and said, you see, these Westerners, they really have a great insight. It was all Appa's ideas. I have written. His college friend wasn't intelligent enough to know, to recognize them when it came from somebody he knew. So we spent years, and Appa created, some of you may know, but I will tell you, an original theory of social development. There is none other in the existence in the world, even 40 years later. There's nothing to compare with it. 5 years ago, I met a very famous Italian, not famous, but a very well-known, respected Italian sociologist. And over lunch, I said to him, what we really need is a theory of social development, a theory of society. I didn't tell him it already existed. He said, yes, that's what we need. We don't have it. But how is it possible? If I had told him it already existed, he would have just laughed at me because they don't even think it's possible 40 years later. Just realize Life Divine was written 100 years ago. If you try telling people today that somebody has written and given us the whole process of human evolution over the next 30,000 years, it's all known already. All the political evolution, the social evolution, everything is known. Do you think they will even ask you the name of the person or the name of the book? They won't believe. They won't even think of being curious. Somebody's written it? 30,000? Really? What is it? What's the name? Where can I get that book? Quick, tell me. It doesn't even enter in the mind as something that's real. Appa has very often looked at the events in the world since 1872 when Sri Aurobindo was born. Since 1904, since 1878, since 1904, when he was the first Indian freedom leader who announced that the goal of the freedom struggle is not limited self-rule or representation in parliament or something like that. It's complete and total independence of India from the British. People were bewildered. That's not what the Congress leaders were saying. That's not what the elite were saying. If anything, they were thinking, why would anybody want to be independent of the British? We're the jewel in the crown of the empire. We're very proud of it. What we want is, we want members of the parliament. We want to be welcomed and treated on an equal par with the British. Sri Aurobindo's thought was so far in advance that even in 1945, he said this in 1904. Even in 1945, the Indian freedom, the leaders did not believe it was possible. And even in 1945, the British had absolutely no intention of giving India complete independence. That was not the plan at all. They thought they were going to hold on to their empire for a long time. But what he said in 1904, which nobody could respond to at that time, led to all of the events that made India free on his birthday in 1947. Why was it on his birthday? Because his was the force, his was the initiative that was being fulfilled. So this discussion we've had many times, and Appa has taught me how to view world events and see. It's not necessary the world reads Life Divine. We'll all be very happy if they do. It's not necessary that the world knows the name of Sri Aurobindo. That was not his intention at all, to be known to anybody. What's necessary is his mission gets fulfilled and completed. He did not want popularity, publicity. Mother says in Agenda, the last thing she wants is publicity. If we give publicity, if we perform some miracles, there'll be 100,000 or 1 million people here. We won't be able to do any work. That will be completely a waste of time. To become popular and to become known is meaningless. They came here not to be personally known. They came here to transform life on earth. That's the most serious work that can be done, and it can't be done by newspaper articles or public speeches or hundreds of thousands of followers. It's done in the spiritual and the life plane. So, over the period since they came on earth, if you look at it, the progress that humanity has made in the last 120 years is equivalent to the progress of more than 1,000 years before. You can't even say that. It may be 2,000 years. The magnitude of the progress that we've made, economically, socially, politically. There was almost no democracy in the world. You may not believe, but in 1920, when the League of Nations was founded, the American President Wilson said, "We are doing this to save the world for democracy." I always thought he's a great Democrat and he wanted to spread democracy. That was 1920, means 100 years ago. But now I'm reading some very important books written by an English historian that say he never meant that everybody should vote and elect the people. He meant each nation should be free and independent. They called that democracy. It was democracy for the countries from foreign domination. It was not democracy for the people to elect their participants. The very nature of the concept of democracy, or what they meant by it, has changed so much. Now, today, it's spreading all over the world. In every area, whether you talk about economic development, social development, education, you know what the literacy in India was in 1947? 16%. And you know how they define literacy? You can read a sentence and write your name. Only 16% of the population in 1947 was literate. And this is all over the world. So the development we've seen over this period is absolutely unprecedented, unimaginable. And it's accelerating. It's going faster and faster. And the reason it's doing that is not because of the technology, which especially the Westerners are so enamored of. It's because of the spiritual force that's descended and is moving and transforming the world. That's what they came for. So I've tried to use the novel to talk not just about the knowledge that they have brought that's personally valuable to the individual, and the knowledge that's valuable to an organization like a company, but the knowledge they brought about the society and how it evolves and how it develops, which is the main work that Appa has done. Original thinking on management and and social development, and also to show how life is evolving. So I did that by saying that wherever this book has appeared, it has been the instrument of social revolution. Let me first, because many of you don't know what the story is, I'll give you an outline of the story and then come back to this book. The purpose of this introduction was to say, this is not just a personal handbook about how I can solve my problems, though I think almost all the principles of Appa, or Sri Aurobindo and Mother, for changing attitude, for silent will, for non-reaction, for all of those things are there for personal access. All that I have learned from Appa about business development, which is still not known among the management experts of the world, we wrote it in the books and have practiced it. I put all those principles and ideas in the book, all the basic processes by which the society develops, which social science has not yet discovered. The principles, the fundamental principles, at least are, many of them are shown in the book. And also pointing at the evolution, the spiritual evolution that's going on at a subtle level, which nobody even understands why it's happening or what's driving it. So the plot of the story is that 4 young and technical and computer engineers meet at a conference in 2000, and they find they have something in common. They all share a belief or a vision that the way we're using the technology is not the true way it should be used, that our use of the technology is actually dehumanizing us. And there must be a way that we can use this technology in a way that will not only make us prosperous and make life convenient, but it will help us become more and more human. It will help us develop and evolve. It will make us more human, just the way, because we have tractors now and we don't have to physically plow the field by ourselves, we don't become less human because we use the tractor. We be able to take our energies and do higher things. We don't have to do what a bullock can do or what a steam engine or a petrol car can do. We can begin to think, we can feel, we can be creative, we can be artistic, we can be human. We don't have to be just like an animal as before. Technology can help us become more human because we have more time. Instead of spending all your time making the mao and grinding the way cooking used to be done in the past, there'll be more time for human relations, there'll be more time for education, there'll be more time for thinking. We don't have to go and carry water in buckets from a well a mile away and the whole life is drudgery. We can be more human because of the technology. But that's not an idea that's prevalent in the West, and especially and at all levels about technology. So they share this aspiration, but they have absolutely no idea of how to do it. And almost everything in the book, almost everything in the book, none of it is directly about me or my personal experience, but almost everything I have put in the book is based on a personal experience, transposed into characters. And sometime I'll give you a few examples so you understand what I mean. It doesn't mean this happened to me exactly like it's in the story, but I tried to base myself on what I know is true of life. And therefore, the most obvious one is, I was in college I studied psychology because I wanted to understand about myself. I wanted to understand about what do we know about human beings and about our life and what makes us happy. So I studied psychology and I found out, reading all of the famous psychologists, I haven't learned anything about myself or about other people. I've learned about the theories. I'm an expert in the theories. I can repeat them. I can to anybody, but I haven't. The theories are not real. Haven't given me a real knowledge about what it is to be a human being, what it is to be happy, what it is to grow and develop.
Garry?
Yes, Ashok.
Though your book is primarily a book about accomplishment, I think there is a fair mixture of spiritual values and aspirations in that book. In that sense, Appa once commented to me about Pride and Prejudice. He said that when Lizzie showed appreciation of Darcy's point of view, he said her capacity for appreciating the other man's point of view, that carries a supramental touch. In that sense, have you managed to introduce any supramental influences like that in your novel?
I think the novel is filled with supramental influences. And I will, I was going to take this in a kind of the very fact, this is a story about people who accomplish infinitely. It is a story about infinite accomplishment, infinite multiplication of money. They changed the world. We don't have any precedent today. If you think about who has accomplished most infinitely, the only thing we can think about is Google or Apple, because today we can't live without Google. They're all over. They have changed the way the world works. This is a story about 4 people who do something that goes way beyond in its impact on life the contribution of any of all of them together, the Google, the Apple, the Facebook, the Amazon, and all of whom have changed our life and the way we live. Because they have not just done something that's physically or technologically done, they have given access to a knowledge that can help people consciously grow and evolve, develop their consciousness, to evolve the consciousness. It is purely thought from life divine and the supramental power that's acting. And I tried to put that in the story, but I think just to be fair to those who don't know what the story is about, I've finished the outline of the story very briefly, and then I'll try to illustrate what I mean by it. So it's a very good question, Ashok. I'm not just talking about individual accomplishment or individual fulfillment. That's why I said the story is written on 4 levels. I started with that to say, that's how I came here. I came here, I was not interested in accomplishment in a company. I was not interested in the development of the global society. I didn't know anything about supramental transformation or spiritual evolution of humanity. All I knew was I needed knowledge. I wanted a knowledge that did not exist in the Western world, and even in the literature I read Hinduism, I read Gita, I read other Buddhists and other traditions that I couldn't find anywhere. And like these characters, I spent 2 years, I dropped out of school after medical school. I dropped out because I knew I believed I needed something, I wanted something, and nobody seemed to know how to give it. I spent 2 years hunting for it, reading everything I could, including I saw Sri Aurobindo, but it seemed to be too serious for me, but I knew the name. And finally, I gave up because all my efforts, reading even the Gita and other things, didn't give me the answer I wanted. And I decided to go back. And when the book fell off the shelf. I've used, because this was real to me, and one of the deepest convictions I have is that if your aspiration is sincere, it's necessary for you to know how to accomplish it. Because I did have an aspiration. It was real to me. I had no idea how to accomplish it, how to fulfill it, where I could get the knowledge, or what was waiting for me. Life brought that knowledge. And what happened to me personally is what happens to the characters in the story. They have an aspiration. They had a much higher aspiration than I had in real life, because my aspiration was only I wanted something personally. I never thought of transforming the world and doing any of the things that Appa's asked me to do and we're working on the last 35 years. It was personal. These people had a selfless aspiration to do something and give something to the world, but they had absolutely as little idea how to do it as I had about Sri Aurobindo and Life Divine when I was looking for it. But as my aspiration had a power to bring what I wanted, as Mrs. Bennett's aspiration had the power to bring Darcy and Bingley and Wickham and Collins to Meriton, the sincerity of their aspiration created the opening and the opportunity for all they accomplished. Their accomplishment was great because their aspiration was great. What's the title of the first chapter of Life Divine? Human Aspiration. And why it's the title of the first chapter? Because everything that follows depends on that. And probably when we read the first chapter, not all of us have been filled with a passionate aspiration for God, light, freedom, and immortality. But that has been the age-old aspiration of humanity. And what he tells us in the first chapter is what I have learned from not only that book, from personal experiences. The aspiration will inevitably fulfill itself. If not in this life, in another life. If not in this way, in another way. That is his central message, because the aspiration is not the individual's egoistic aspiration. It's the divine in us. And if you read his book, The Secrets of the Veda, where the hymns to Agni, whole Rig Veda is filled with hymns to Agni. Agni is the sacrificial fire, but he says Agni is the human aspiration. Agni is the divine will. Our aspiration is the divine's will in us. It's not the human. It is the divine in us which aspires, and it is that that has the power to bring and create anything. Sri Aurobindo had 5 dreams. I would say he had 5 aspirations. His first aspiration was for the freedom of India. It came on his birthday. It took 45 years, 3 years, but it happened. Nobody expected it to happen. It had his second aspiration, second dream was for the liberation and renaissance of Asia. First, it happened in Japan. It happened with the freedom of all the Asian colonies. Then the rise of Korea. You realize in 1952, Korea was poorer than India. Then it's happened to China. Now it's happening to India, and everybody says that the 21st century is going to be the Asian century. It's the century of the renaissance of Asia, his second dream, his second aspiration. His third aspiration is for world unity, the political unification of the world. It's a political unification of the world. We're working on a project on it now. We've given a proposal to the United Nations on it. And today, the world doesn't even believe that the world can be politically unified. Just like the Indian freedom leaders didn't believe that India could be totally free. But it's happening. The process is moving very quickly. And Sri Aurobindo explains all of that in his book, The Ideal of Unity. He sets out he wrote that book 100 years ago, before there was a League of Nations. He tells the whole steps, all the way from the family and the kingdom to the nation state and on. He gives the whole process to us. And it's happening and working itself out. And when you read, if you read the historians, as we are doing, Appa is reading, we discuss it every day, you see, they know the facts, they don't even see what's happening. They don't see the direction and how it's going. They don't understand. They say it goes here, it goes there, it goes backwards and forwards. We don't know. There's no direction. And they say, 1945, everybody believed that the colonial empires will continue. Within 10 years, colonialism was completely abolished from the world. Even now, they don't understand how it happened. 1989, Appa started we started the International Commission on Peace and Food to try to stop the confrontation between the superpowers. Within 2 years, the Cold War was over. Communism dissolved. The Soviet Union dissolved. Germany was reunited. Even today, nobody can explain how it happened. Nobody expected it. There is a power moving in the world. So Sri Aurobindo's third dream is already working itself out. It doesn't matter who knows whose dream or whose aspiration it is. It's the aspiration of the divine being realized. His fourth dream is India should become the spiritual guru of the world. For that, India has to be reunited, has to be whole, has to be prosperous, has to stop corruption and cheating and lying. It has to do so much before it can teach anybody about spirituality. But we must look for that. And his fifth is the supramental transformation. Already in 1956, Mother has brought the supramental consciousness down. It's already working. We are concerned about our problems, our opportunities, our jobs, our children, our money, and all of that. We are not thinking about India. We're not thinking about the world. We're not thinking about the supramental transformation. But if you do, as Appa is all the time and discussing it all the time, you will see all the 5 dreams are already, his aspirations are working themselves out. And he says in the first chapter of Life Divine, it's inevitable. It's not a possibility. The fulfillment of these the human aspiration is inevitable because it is the plan of the divine plan. It is the aspiration of the divine in nature. We may affect how soon it happens and all, but we can never deter it from its final achievement. So, this is all background. The plot of the book is, like I was looking for something, these 4 have an aspiration. They come together and they find they have a common aspiration and they decide to do something extraordinary. They decide to give up very good jobs, very high-paying jobs at the top of the IT industry, to risk all the money they have earned from their success, to start a company to do what nobody has done, what nobody has thought of doing, and what nobody knows how to do. And they try to do it, and they succeed in doing something. They succeed in making a software that will create a lot of money on the stock market. more than any company has created. That software is so valuable, they can sell it for $1 billion without any trouble if they want. They have succeeded according to human standards, according to the standards of the day. In 2 or 3 years, they have achieved what nobody has achieved. But they said, that's not what we set out to achieve. We have ended up achieving more of the old thing that can never, we have said we are using the computer in a way that will harm the future of the society, not fulfill it. We cannot use this product. We cannot sell it. We have to give it up. And we can't give it to anybody else who's willing to buy it because they will use it. So they were faced with having to give up a power that anybody would want to have. Anybody in their right mind, meaning a normal person who did what they did, they would be the Bill Gates, who's the wealthiest man today, or the Steve Bezos, or the Warren Buffett. They would be that person today simply because of what they did in 3 years. And they realized, no, that's not what we intended to do. And doing that will not fulfill our aspiration. It will go in the opposite direction. So we must give it up. And that was, for me, I'm giving you the parallel so you see why it was so important to me. I got into one of the top medical schools in the US. I went there, and then I decided, all my friends were envious. I knew many, and oh, you have made it, your life is over, you've got everything, the rest of your life you don't have to worry about. And then I said, I realized, no, that's not the answer for me. It may be the answer for all my friends. If I do this, my life will be meaningless, and I gave it up. My family could not understand why I gave it up. My friends could not understand why I gave it up. They all thought I was crazy. And I know it was the most important, valuable thing I ever did in my life. The very right thing I did. But I had no idea, just like they did, when they gave up this program that they had created, they called it MAIS, M-A-I-S. When they gave it up without any idea of what comes next. And that's what I did. I gave it up without having any idea what to do instead or better than this. It's not like I had another alternative. And I came to the point of despair after 2 years that, well, I have given up everything, but I have gotten nothing in return, and maybe I should go back to medical school again because I have proven to myself that I don't know what I'm doing. And that's the moment in which the book fell. When I gave up even my seeking. That's what Abba talks about non-initiative. I aspired, but I aspired to fulfill through my seeking, through my effort. The real effort necessary is the aspiration and the faith. I exhausted my effort for 2 years, trying everything, going everywhere, doing everything, and finally giving up because my effort was just leading me in circles. And then the book came. The same thing happens to them. They achieved, they gave it up, not knowing how to go ahead now. They've lost, they're giving up all the money, investment, everything, how to go and function. And they tried for another 2 or 3 years, and at the point where they couldn't go any further, and it looked like they would have to dissolve the company and go back to their jobs. Exactly, you see the parallel. It's real life experience, but I put it in a story. The book falls, comes to Dan, one of the 4 main characters. And from that moment on, they don't take initiative. Life takes initiative. For the rest of, until they reach the ultimate achievement It's not their initiatives, it's their aspiration. So I learned a great personal lesson. That's what Sri Aurobindo's telling us in the first chapter of Life Divine. He's telling us even if the outer circumstances seem to be exactly opposite, contradictory to what the aspiration is, in fact, the more opposite they are, the more it means it's intended to happen. And you talk about in 1920 that India should be the guru of the world. India is a slave country. India is impoverished, degenerated, slave country. You're talking about it being the guru of the world. It is the opposite. And he gives that principle in the first chapter. That is the surest sign of nature's intention. The opposite experience comes to prepare you for the higher achievement. I saw it in myself. If I hadn't spent those first 2 years, I would have never understood the value of Sri Aurobindo and Mother's thinking when I got it. Because I would, this is an interesting book, let me read that. Because I searched for 2 years and I knew there was no answer anywhere, and suddenly I get a book which gives everything I'm looking for and everything that nobody has, I was able to appreciate it. If I hadn't gone to that point of exhausting my effort, even to despair, I would never have been understood the value of what I got. And that's what happens to them. And then the rest of the story is, they don't know what to do any more than we know what to do to fulfill. They didn't know what to do. Life opens up one after the book comes. They try to study the book. They try to understand the book. And after each time they understand something more, a greater opportunity comes. And each opportunity appears to be impossible. It appears impossible to fulfill. And that's the principle that Sri Aurobindo says, the greater the impossibility, the greater the inevitability. That's what life is doing. Life has made, the divine has made the inanimate matter animate life, made the subconscious life thinking mind. The next step is it's going to make the ignorant seeking individual mind supramental, the mind of the divine mind. That is the surest sign. So it happens to them. And each time they're presented with an opportunity that looks to be impossible. They are asked they're desperate for work. And they get an opportunity to develop a software to help human beings going for the International Space Station. The space stations were launched after about 2000, 2002, and they sent up 3, 4, 5, 6 astronauts living in a very tight little space. I mean, really tight. There's no extra space in there. For 6 months, 6 people. Just imagine living in the bathroom with 6 people, how, or in a kitchen, how life will be. Well, NASA, which was doing this, was concerned, how are we going to ensure that these people get along and are not strangling each other or murdering each other? Even man and woman after 6 months are at each other's neck. At least the man can go off to work, and maybe nowadays the woman can go off to work. How are we going to keep them together for 6 months in outer space? They can't even get away from each other. They can't even go into another room. How are they going to survive? And do you think you can develop a software that will help them live in harmony with each other? That knowledge doesn't exist in the world. No psychologist has that knowledge. But they get the opportunity. And through the book, through the decision-making matrix, they actually discover the secret of harmony, of human harmony. Profound secret, which I guarantee you psychologists don't know even today. And that leads to the next opportunity, which appears equally extraordinary. They meet one of the four characters. I have an Irish American, an Indian from Kerala, a Russian woman, mathematician, brilliant mathematician, and a Jewish boy engineer from Boston. Different characters. They're a group of humanity, subgroup of humanity. And the Indian Vinay, he's traveling on the plane, and he meets a businessman whose company is on the verge of closure because the whole industry is going out of business. Well, this was actually our real experience, because in 1990, I went to Delhi. Appa sent me to go to the president of FICCI, Federated Indian Chamber of Commerce, and tell him that we have a method that can make any company double its profits. So I went to the man, Dr. Bansidhar was his name. He was from the old DCM group. They had split. It's the 100-year-old company. So I told him, I just repeated the thing. See, we have strategies. We can make any company double its profits. And he smiled mischievously and said, really, you really believe that? What I really was thinking is, well, Appa really believes that. I can't tell him Appa really believes that. So I said, yes, I really believe that. And he says, what do you know about the rayon tire cord business? Well, I don't know much, but I don't think rayon tire cords are very common today, because then we had nylon and we had polyester and we had steel radial and all. He says, yes, you know enough. Actually, rayon tire cord has gone out of business 20 years ago, and plants all over the world are closing or closed. There are only 6 plants left in the world. One is his. Now, do you still believe that any company can double its profits in 2 years or less? Well, I said, I know Appa believes it. So yes, we accept the challenge. And when we finished our study, I was writing the recommendations to show that we can double the profits. Appa said, no. That's only the first recommendations. Second set of recommendations is they can triple their profits in 2 or 3 years. You really think anybody will believe this? I said. Third set of recommendations is they can increase their profits 6 times in 2 to 3 years. I said, well, how can I write this? I wrote it. I went there and presented it. 3 years later, I met the son of the chairman. I said, what happened to your company? We tripled the profits in 3 years. So what I have put in the novel is not fiction. I changed the characters, I changed the company, I changed the circumstances, because I have lived through that. This is really real. This is not just fiction. Everything that's there, except for some of the drama, everything was based on what I know is possible in life. We put it in a different setting and a context of the story. So they go on through one level or another, and it exactly follows my experience with Appa. First, learning about accomplishment, then learning about business, then learning about the society, and then learning about life. And as some of you know, the knowledge that Appa has given about life, nobody in the world. Appa says every Indian village has somebody who knows these things, but I have never met anybody with this knowledge, or read of anybody with this knowledge, and how it can be made practical in our life. The world doesn't know it. So they get this knowledge through the book. And just to be a little truer to life, they discover not only the book, but after that they discover what I call the archives, which are documents on the internet which are written by somebody else, but seem to have the knowledge of the book. And then they discover something else which they call the messages, which seem to be short statements that affirm the principles of the book. I think you can understand why I did that. Because I wanted to quote not only material from Life Divine, I wanted to quote from Appa's writings because he takes them so broadly, the ideas from his writings. So I created the archives and the messages. They're the messages that Appa, the daily messages he wrote. Because what I have learned and the knowledge put in the book is not just the philosophy from Life Divine, it's its application in life. And that was what I learned from Appa. I didn't have the capacity to derive it myself. So I'm just explaining to you why what's there in the novel is a symbolic representation of actually what I know to be true. So they go through, they not only are able to make money, huge money, they're able to solve political problems that have never been solved, like the problem in Ireland, which was actually solved when Appa was working on it in 2005. Nobody knows about it. At some point when they're phenomenally successful, they meet many challenges. They're attacked from many sides. I call it a spiritual thriller. It's filled with enemies and opposition, which is symbolic, but very true to life, because society always violently resists what's beyond them. It denies it, it ignores it, and if it can't ignore it, it opposes it hostilely. And that's what happened to Appa in his life, and it happened to us at different levels. It happened to Jesus. They put him on the stake, they crucified him because what he said was too much of a provocation at that time. So the political drama, there's a political drama, there's espionage, there's attempts to steal the book, all of that, which is symbolic of the fact that the more you try to implement this knowledge up to a certain level, it's fine. Beyond that, you challenge the existing society. And everything Appa wants to do and everything Mother stands for is a complete challenge to the existing society. Mother says money should be eliminated. Sri Aurobindo says inequality should be eliminated. The figures today, I don't know, somewhere between, I forget the number, 26 and 46 of the richest people in the world have as much money as half of the world's population. That is 3.5 billion people. 25 or 50, it's less than 50 people, have as much money as 3.5 billion people. Imagine somebody who proudly says, I eat 75 idlis for breakfast and 100 dosas for lunch and so many chapatis for dinner, and he's proud of it. We live in a world that's so vulgar, that's so primitive. We don't brag today about how many slaves we had. But 200 years ago, when America was founded, the standard of prosperity in the south of the United States was how many? He's got 300 slaves. Today, how proud will you be to admit that you keep slaves at home? How popular will you be if you find out that somebody's got slaves? The society, they won't shun you, they'll lock you up. They'll persecute you. You'll be in prison for the rest of your life. Because society has evolved in 200 years. 50 years ago, or in 1945, the thing that Britain was most proud of was we are the biggest empire in the world. Who can go around bragging today that we have conquered so many countries and they belong to us and we take everything we want from them and they have to obey us? Even if you want to do it, you can't do it. You'll be outlawed. You'll be prosecuted by the country and by the world. Because we've progressed. Where we have progressed in basic terms of war, it's now illegal. You can't just go and attack other countries and create war. You'll be tried for crimes against humanity. There's still war and fighting, but no country can say, I am going to conquer other countries. At least they have to have an excuse and say that it's for our self-defense that we're doing this. They can't claim that they're going to, if Pakistan today claims, no, Kashmir is ours and we're going to take it by force, they can't get one vote in the UN supporting that. There may be friends of theirs who will be happy if they take it, but nobody can stand up and say that this is theirs because we've evolved. But it's still respectable to eat 100 idlis for breakfast. As Abbas said, because there was a wedding last week, he commented, he said, if you go and hang 10 kilos of gold around your neck to go to a wedding and show everybody, say if you go to Silicon Valley, you won't be able to tell the billionaire from they both wear jeans. The idea of showing off your wealth and hanging it around and making the woman an ornament like a Christmas tree is something people would be ashamed of. But the world is still worshiping money to the point where we're not ashamed that the people who have all of that money are not ashamed of being slave owners. It's all going to go. It's going to go as surely as colonial governments are gone. It's going to go as surely as slavery is gone. It's going to go, you can't beat your children anymore. Here you may still get away with it. In the US, if you beat your children, even if the children don't mind, you'll be locked in jail. They're my children. It doesn't matter whose children they are. You have no right to beat your own child. You'll be put in jail. Well, who will take care of my children? You have disqualified yourself. We'll find somebody else. Unimaginable, no? The teachers, when you were growing up, the teacher beating the child, that's normal. That was normal in England in the 19th century. They gave it up in the 20th century. The teacher will be in jail. They are doing it. They don't make that mistake anymore. So it's only a question of time. So society is changing. But when you announce something of the future, something beyond where the society is today, say today, everybody knows everybody's corrupt in the political system. I think you've seen the figures that of the people running in parliament or are in parliament, half of them have criminal records. No. How long will it be before to have any kind of criminal record means you're completely disqualified? We also have people of criminal mind in the US, but they don't have criminal records. They may be criminals in their thinking, but they haven't been caught and put in prison. They're disqualified, and nobody will. So we are evolving as a society, and when you go beyond what's accepted today, you know what happens if you have an honest man in the government where everybody's corrupt. They will accuse that man of corruption. It happened with Talwar, who was he was a devotee of Mother, and they wanted to find a non-corrupt person to be the next chairman, and they chose Talwar, who was number 10 or 15 in the line of eligibility. And so his colleagues foisted a case against him for rampant corruption. They had an inquiry in Parliament, they found out he's the only man who isn't corrupt among all of the top people. And he was chosen for 2 terms as the chairman. But that's because he was a devotee of Mother. Otherwise, he'll just be wiped out. That's history. So there'll always be the opposition. Appa met that opposition at every stage of his work in his life. We have met it in our stage. So I put that in because the work was at a big level in the story. I showed that opposition coming from different sides through different ways, which made the story, I hope, a little more interesting. So the book consists of 6 books, actually, or 6 parts. The first one is the quest of these young people, where they find the book. The second, I called it the Gnostic Stairway. It was taking off from Sri Aurobindo's book 2 of Savitri, The World Stair, because there Sri Aurobindo gives us, and that's where we were talking in Savitri, and we got to the early part of book 2, and then it got discontinued because of my travels. He discovers all the levels of knowledge and planes of consciousness in the universe, as Aswapati discovers. So they go through all of these stages of discovering what I learned from Appa about life and management and society and so forth. And then they discover the process of accomplishment. That's book 3. Whether it's individual accomplishment or accomplishment in business or in society. So what is that process, how it expresses, and how they figure out how to use it. And then they discover life, which to the Westerner doesn't even exist, and to me has been one of the most exciting things of having come to India, because if the Westerner knows what life really is, which he explains in Life Divine, it's there. The chapter on man in the universe, he explains that what comes to us from life is exactly what we need. It's not karmic punishment for our bad deeds or rewards for our good deeds. It's what we need for the next stage of our evolution. They discover that. They discover that what comes to them is only to awaken them. And by the way, in The Ideal of Human Unity, Sri Aurobindo explains that that's not only true for people, that's true for countries. Why the Mughals came to India and why the British came to India and why India was enslaved for centuries, because that was the only way it could be unified. India is thousands of year old civilization, but it has never been unified because it was consisted of 500 or maybe 1,000 at one time, I don't know, princely states. Each state vibrant, successful itself, competing with the others, none of them having this urge to unite, each wanting its independence. But the destiny of India was it could not grow into itself unless it became a modern nation. It could not do that because it was so divided. Divided by caste, divided by principalities, divided by religious groups, by so many things. So nature brought the foreign invasion and the foreign domination in order to unify the country. He explains it in The Ideal of Human Unity. It's very beautiful. Makes so much sense, you understand. And he explains not only India, he explains what happened to other countries around the world as well. But it's the same principle. When I read it in Ideal of Human Unity, I didn't realize this is the chapter 6 in Life Divine, the relationship between man and the world he lives in. It's the same principle applied in political life. It's the same principle in family life. It's the same principle in work, in corporate life. There's only one life. So part 6, 5, and 4 is life, And of course, it's trying to address fundamental superstition of the West and of people everywhere, because about chance. Sri Aurobindo writes in the second book, the first chapter, cosmic determinants. The determinants, indeterminates, cosmic determinations, and the indeterminable. Long, long title. But essentially what he says in that chapter is there is no such thing as chance. Science has explained the whole of the world, everything in the world, only in terms of two principles. It's either a law or it's chance. Laws of nature, we don't know why they're the way they are, but there are laws and there is chance. He says emphatically, there is no such thing as chance. There is nothing that happens without meaning. Everything comes with a meaning and a purpose, and that purpose is the evolution of our consciousness, even if it's a foreign invasion, even if it's the genocide or murder or anything else. It all has a meaning in the evolution of the individual and the society. That's life. So I started the novel, and then part 5 is consciousness. Because up until now, they've been only learning about accomplishment in life and money and everything. But they don't know really what the human consciousness is, let alone the spiritual consciousness. I started with material things, social things, business things, but they keep going. They don't know where they're going. They suddenly come across the knowledge that makes them understand the planes of consciousness and how they cannot fully understand the life unless they know the different planes of the consciousness. That's why he wrote Book 2 of Savitri. That's why he wrote the Sevenfold Chord of Being and in Life Divine. And then the last part is evolution. They have no idea when they start this process that they themselves and human beings can evolve in their consciousness. The psychologist has no idea of that. He knows we can build better technology. He knows we can get more information. He knows we can get more education. Maybe we can become more civilized, whatever that means. But the idea that we are evolving in consciousness is not known to the top of the world, the bottom of the ordinary people. I mean, the leading thinkers in the world is not known today. We don't know what consciousness is. How can it evolve? We don't understand histories and evolution of consciousness, societies and evolution.
Garry?
Yes, Ashok.
You say there are no such things as accidents, but let us take the case of Rajiv Gandhi. He became Prime Minister by accident. And after Nixon resigned, Ford became a president by accident. These are accidental PMs and presidents. What about that?
What we mean by accident and what the scientist means by chance is we don't know why it happened. That doesn't mean that it happened by chance. Some time ago, I was talking with the team. We were having a meeting. I think you may have been there, upstairs on the top floor with the MSS team. And just to give an example, I said, mentioned something about Vasanti. The next instant, Vasanti walked in the door. She's not even living in the house anymore. Even if she's living in the house, she'll be going on another floor. The next instant, she walked in the door. Any Westerner would say, oh, it's a chance. It happened by chance. What does it mean? We don't know we don't see the causality that made it happen. That's all it means. Our ignorance we call chance. If somebody comes in the door just now, we said, by chance you happened to come. He says, not by chance, I've been planning this for a week. I wanted to come earlier, I got delayed, now I just came in. To me, it looks like chance because I don't know why they came. And I don't know all of the circumstances because that's not on the surface for us. So chance is our ignorance of the reason. Science is so arrogant that it says what we're ignorant of has no reason. Instead of recognizing, they have to much more to learn. The moment they realize there is an explanation for everything, science will evolve by centuries. It's a superstition. So I started the book. I know it's out of context for most of you, by a conference on artificial intelligence in 2000, because according to the Western world, we're at the verge of knowing everything because science has produced computer and artificial intelligence and there's nothing more to know. It's a complete superstition that doesn't realize they have yet to just peel back the onion skin and see anything behind the surface. All their knowledge will just crumble as superstition because it's very powerful technology, but the knowledge of the whole is so inadequate. So I wanted to pose this because the reason I chose this conference theme was that Appa has been sending me to scientists for the last 40 years to say, Sri Aurobindo wrote the theory or the philosophy or the truth of spiritual evolution 100 years ago. The scientist refuses to concede. He thinks he knows all the answers. Evolution is a process of chance. It's the chantation of the genes that explains human evolution. According to the scientists today, your mind, your emotions, your feelings, your values are all the result simply of chemistry and electricity. You think you're a person. It's all just some electrical figment of the imagination. It's like Maya. Our life, if the scientist, if he really listens to what he's saying, his own life is only Maya. He's another version of Shankara. Shankara said the life is Maya. The scientist is saying our human experience is Maya. There's only chemistry and electricity. It's such a superstition that in the future, I don't know whether it's 10 years or 100 years, they won't be able to look back on this period as a period of civilized humanity. I don't mean India. I mean the West. The people 100 years from now, or whenever it happens, it doesn't take long once it happens, they won't be able to think, could anybody have been that primitive? Could they have been so stupid? They prided themselves on their Harvard universities and Oxfords and Cambridge, internet and encyclopedias and all of that. Their science, they say they've discovered everything, their national academies. They really thought that everything is reduced to chemistry and electricity and chance? Then how are we different from the primitive who believed that doing his external ritual and going around the fire so many times or putting the incense is what determines everything in the world, and if we don't do it, there'll be a catastrophe. What's the difference? The thing is, they have PhDs now. When it happens, you'll see. It will happen like that. I'm sure. When it will happen, I'm not sure, because I'm moving in those circles. They just refuse to even exercise the mind and have a discussion. It's not like you have a discussion and it's dismissed. It never comes up as a discussion because we know. There are only two theories. There's the Christian theory that everything's created by a God, and we can't explain anything because if everything has been created by God, why has he created such a mess? This is the first chapter of book 2 of Life Divine. Sri Aurobindo describes the whole thing. There are only 3 possibilities. Or everything is simply what the scientist says, it's chance and necessity. And Sri Aurobindo argues, if chance is really the creator of everything, the only thing it will create is chaos. How much order will there be in your house if you let the young children go around and just mix things up? It's not going to be by chance that everything gets put in its proper place, no? There's no chance. Leave the children to do and decorate and organize everything they want. There's no chance, 1 in a million, that everything will be in cupboards and packed nicely and everything will be in its place. It will be all over the place. That's the only thing that chance can do. It can create chaos. But our world is quite the opposite of chaos. We have order everywhere. We have so many elements in a periodic table. We have so many life forms going up. We have bees are pollinating the flowers and the ants are doing everything is helping everything else. Everything has an order to it. But we don't see who's creating the order. So we say it's chance. Very intelligent bees and ants. It's superstition. When it falls, it will look, we won't even be able to understand how we could have been so superstitious. Now we have to admire, he's got a PhD. He's got a Nobel Prize. Therefore, he's, at the last fall, I was invited to Oxford for a conference. And I just quoted from Life Divine. I said, according to what you say, mud, a mud cake, a cake of mud, a plum pudding, they're English. So Sri Aurobindo wrote this in Life Divine, plum pudding. I didn't make it up. A mud cake, a mud pie, and a plum pudding are more real than the works of Shakespeare and Hamlet and Kalidasa and all of the Beethoven symphonies, the highest aspirations, love, truth, freedom. All of this is nothing but an illusion. The only thing that's really real is the mud pie and the plum pudding and other things of that type. Of course, I added a few things to it, but that was the essence of it. At the end of it, there was applause from the whole audience. So in my story, I start with that, not because it's some silly exaggeration. So I brought that up. I tried to, because that's the real issue that Appa wanted to address in the West, in the world. You have to address it in the West because the Indians are all looking to copy the West. The knowledge is here, but the prestige is there. So for 40 years, he's been sending me to people to try to open this up. That's why I'm working in the World Academy and all. And so I started the book by a conference where one man is putting forth this view, and that is the view behind the artificial intelligence and the fascination with the computer. That doesn't mean artificial intelligence is bad or wrong. It's the conclusions we draw and the worldview we draw about ourselves and life. So I made it a great debate. And the rest of the book is really a working out to prove that the prevailing view of science is wrong. These people discover it through their adventure, through their discovering the knowledge in the book. So the book was not written just as a personal adventure. It's written, what will the world believe when they know Life Divine and they accept it? How will it be different? How will they think differently? How will science be different? How will knowledge be different? How will global society be different? All of that I have tried to put. It's not just a personal story, it's the story of the world, which is what Sri Aurobindo was really concerned with. And the final part of the book, I called evolution, is the fact that these characters who had no intention, they didn't know there's anything like evolution, even though I didn't know before I came here, they begin to evolve and they begin to have experiences, not because somebody has told them there's a great spirit or something, because it comes, it descends. They begin to have spontaneous spiritual experiences. They started out to make money and build a computer program, and they end up finding that the knowledge of the book takes them to spontaneous spiritual experience. And I left it, I stopped it at that point. So this is the brief outline of the plot. It has so many events and dramas and everything else, but that's what I was trying to communicate. The story is about the book, and this is a true. I show that the story starts with the fact that somebody went into a bookstore in Berkeley in 1964, finds this book, and suddenly revolution breaks out on the Berkeley campus. And it was the first of the student protests that within 4 years went to all over the world. It's a true story. I landed at the Berkeley campus in 1964, and the month I came there, revolutionary student protests broke out, and over the next 4 years, it went all over the US and all over major cities around the world. I did not revolt. I was not a revolutionary. I simply was there. I never paid any attention to it, except some very strange thing is going on. Then in 1968, it's a true story. 1968, after I graduated, I went to Europe for 3 months. And I went behind the Iron Curtain, if any of you can remember that there was an Iron Curtain and the world with Europe was divided in half. Communist, authoritarianism, you couldn't go. You had to get permission to go. On one side, democracy on the other. I drove in my car from Vienna to Prague, which was Czechoslovakia was a communist authoritarian country. And there was a revolution going on there of people asking for freedom, asking for liberty. In fact, the kids there were behaving like they do in Berkeley. 4 years later, the spirit that started in Berkeley has come even behind the Iron Curtain in the communist countries. And they were asking for more freedom and they were protesting. I didn't understand the whole thing, but this is really surprising. I didn't know that this is what it's like behind the Iron Curtain. This looks like Berkeley to me. What's the problem here? They're all free. I left Prague and went to Germany, and 1 week later, the Soviet army came in with their tanks, and they arrested everybody. They tore down the government. They put everybody in jail, and they reimposed authoritarian rule. It was a great shock to me. One day you have freedom, the next day you're all in jail and the whole thing is over. I didn't understand. It was the revolution that started in '64 coming here prematurely, and the society has rebelled against it and snuffed it out. That's what happens in my story when the opposition comes and they try to wipe out this company and steal the book because it's premature. But I was there. 1989, Appa sends me to Russia, to Soviet Union, to try to talk to Gorbachev when he's the president of the country. And I go there, and I'm just following Appa's instructions. And within 1 month, the Cold War is over, the Berlin Wall falls down, and within 2 years, the Soviet Union disappears. And they asked Gorbachev at that time, what's the difference between what you're doing here and what they were trying to do in Prague 20 years earlier? He says the only difference is 20 years. Meaning, the revolution that started in Berkeley, went to Prague, they weren't ready for it. 20 years later, the whole thing was washed away. That's the power of the supermind. Then I got curious. This was my personal experience. And I told Appa, I don't know why wherever I go, there's a revolution. I'm not a revolutionary. I'm not trying to. Appa's a revolutionary. So instead of making it personal, in the book, I show in the preface to the book, wherever the book is discovered, revolution happens there. I just impersonalized it. Then I got curious. See, I only know from 64. I was 18 at the time. But the supermind descended in 1956. February 29th, 1956, the supermind descended. So then I went back to look at what happened in 1956. I had forgotten. The Hungarian Revolution was the first protest against Soviet rule, where the Soviets brought in the tanks and stopped the whole thing. This was the first violent protest to end the totalitarianism of the Cold War. So the moment the supermind came down, the revolution started that were to end the Cold War and bring peace. So I showed it in the story, 56, 64, 68, 89, as steps in the way. And they discover in the course of their work, because now the book has come to them in 2004. There's no longer war, there's no longer Cold War and all. Then what is the revolution now? If each time the book shows itself there's a revolution, what's the revolution now? It's a revolution in knowledge. It's a revolution in prosperity. It's a revolution in consciousness. So I link this back to, I don't have that subtle knowledge to see the supermind acting in the subtle plane. But Appa has been observing so much and showing me so much about how the world is changing. So I tried to show that pattern. Whatever this book is, it's not a book. It's not a book that has its power. It's the supramental consciousness that's represented by the book, that wherever it goes, it brings the future. And because the future is not an incremental change from the past, it's a revolutionary change from the past, it comes through some outburst. In 2004, the outburst was the internet, the technology revolution, which revolutionized the world more than any of the other revolutions. The internet has connected us and changed us more than any other events in history. Nothing been so revolutionary as that has been. So in this sense is what I mean, that everything written in the book is a representation of something that we have seen in the real world, but I put it in the context of a story that would make sense in itself in an impersonal way. By the way, I should have told you this earlier. My story has 4 main characters, but other important characters. But the most important character in the story, which anybody who's read it would know, comes in the beginning of the story at the conference, Professor Stern, and then doesn't come back again until 80% of the story is over. Don't ask me why I waited, but and Stern, to me, see, this story is not complete without Appa's personality. So, though I have made him a very different character, he's an American, he's a philosophy professor and everything, he plays the same role in their life that Appa has, without making him a guru, but he plays the same role, and he plays the critical role, which nobody knows about, in saving them and helping them go, and finally making the the knowledge available to the whole world. Because as you know, those of you who have read it, they come to the point where the efforts of the forces to suppress the book are so great that they threaten the lives of all the employees of the company. It becomes a question of life or death. And they don't know, without giving up the book, they don't know how to escape this. And he's the one who figures out the way and does it on himself to make the knowledge universal. Once the knowledge is universal, there's no threat to them because they have nothing, they're not keeping anything to themselves. He solves the problem. That's exactly what Appa's been doing. And in my life, he is the one who's more than anyone after Mother. He's the one who's taking this knowledge and making it universal. So to me, the last 20% of the book is full of life. He's a very different character. He's a different character than Appa. I won't say very different. I mean, I've made him a different person. But the spirit, the impact he has on the world and on the people and the inspiration he has and the ideals he has, completely self-effacing. So he's not in the front anywhere. And when the story of this story is told later, they will celebrate the work of the four people, and his name will come way down the list as somebody, there was also a Joseph Stern. But they know that without him, this never could have been done. And once, I don't know how it just came naturally. At some point I said, there's something missing in this story. They can't do this themselves. And then I didn't have the plan to bring him back. This book, it can't be completed. They can't complete their work, their aspiration on their own because they don't have the knowledge. For me, that came in the beginning of my life. That came in the beginning of my quest because after being in the ashram 1.5 years, I realized I couldn't go further on my own. I needed him. For them, they went so far on their own, and then they reached a wall where they just could not go any further, and the whole society was coming down on them. They were threatened. Everything they've done was being threatened and to be destroyed. And at that point, they thought of him, and he found the way to resolve it. So I just wanted you to know, in spirit, to me, Appa's in the whole book, but I needed him even as a person at a critical juncture. I have been talking at the general level to try to explain to you why I wrote the book and it includes what Sri Aurobindo it tries to bring out the central truths of Sri Aurobindo in many of the chapters. I made a list, the idea that contradictions are complements, the power of human aspiration, the two negations, chapter 2 and chapter 3 of Life Divine are the two negations, the materialist denial and the refusal of the ascetic. Well, that's really the debate at the opening conference between two views of the world, neither of which is complete. Both of them in contention with each other. And their contention in the opening conference leads to the discovery of the third way. And I even at one point, there's an interview, a great debate on Larry King TV in my story, where a scientist and a creationist, a religious Christian creationist, are debating. And at the last minute, they invite Professor Stern in. And he presents the third way that nobody's willing to consider. And that's all that Appa said. We wrote articles. He said, if the religious view is rejected by the scientist and the scientific view is rejected by the religious people, and if each sees the fallacy and limitations of the other view, isn't it worth looking for a third view? And this is what Appa asked me to speak 30 years ago, maybe more than that. In fact, in 1989, when we had our meeting at Fisherman's Cove, a physicist, a top physicist from Europe, who later became a close associate and became president of the World Academy, he came to that conference. I asked him to read one chapter of Life Divine on the Indeterminates, the first chapter in book 2, and to spend one more day to discuss with us after the conference was over. And he stayed an extra day, and we discussed Life Divine and what was written in the chapter. And he had the sincerity and the objectivity to say that what's written in this chapter is at least as rational as the view of science. That's asking a lot from a scientist. He said, we argued, at least we should consider a third possibility. And he, having said that, he became the president of the World Academy of Art and Science, which was never on the cards, and a good friend. But science has not had that objectivity or that rationality to even look for. So in the book, I point out all the inconsistencies and all the irrationality of the scientific view, which I did a little here today, this morning. And Stern says the same thing on national TV. If there's so much of confusion and disagreement, isn't it worth looking at a third view? And Larry King, I think some of you know who he is. He's the most famous news broadcaster in America, world famous, but in America he was the number one name. I don't know, not sure whether he's still on. Maybe he is. Very household name, everybody knows that name. So he asked Stern, you say that there should be a third way. Is there a third way? And Stern says, I'm glad you asked me that question. And he steals the show and essentially presents the central theme of Life Divine on national TV. That was my fantasy of breaking this log jam, which has been going on for decades. So Life Divine, the themes of the destiny of the individual, man in the universe, ego and the dualities, the role of ego, conscious force, the process of creation, supermind, the creator, the difference between mind and supermind. I don't use the word supermind, but I'm talking about the whole knowledge, life, falsehood and evil, integral knowledge, planes of consciousness, ascent of consciousness, and many other, not all, but many other of the central themes of Life Divine come out in the context of the story. But the story was really intended to be a personal message to people and not just a philosophical message. So parallel to that which was their development of knowledge for their program, for the company, I tried to cover all the key things. I didn't go to the word consecration because then they have to have recognized and discovered the inner divinity and all. I was leading them up to that point. But I talked about the decision, the inner-outer correspondences, life response, silent will, non-reaction, non-initiative, the power of gratitude, how vibrations spread, the 9 levels of consciousness. I took many real-life incidents and transposed them into the story. For example, I think I might have told this story to you, but it was an absolute turning point in my life. After I wrote The Vital Difference, the first management book, and for various reasons, which I won't go into, it stopped selling. because of my co-author, according to Appa. And one day Appa asked me to go in, sit in the meditation. We were discussing the power of gratitude. And he asked me to go into the meditation hall and just try releasing gratitude for anybody or anything where I have not given it. And I was really having a reaction against my co-author, because even according to Appa, he spoiled the book which we have written. We at great effort. And I went into the meditation hall and I sat for some time, and for about, I think I've told this story, for about 2 minutes or maybe 1 minute, I had a genuine feeling of gratitude for him, forgetting all the things that he had done that I didn't appreciate or that I thought were wrong. And I felt a real gratitude. Maybe it was 30 seconds, I don't know. It wasn't a long time. And then I went to bed. And when I woke up in the morning, this was in 1986, no internet, no email at that time. We had a telex machine. There was a 12-foot long telex message from this man, 12 feet long, saying he's opened up, he sold a big management contract to conduct a conference for 150 or 200 business leaders in the US. He wants me to come there, do a study with him, go around to these companies, and he and I would deliver this conference for 3 days to CEOs of companies. I have not been a consultant to any American company at that time. I have hardly been into many companies at that time. I've never been a speaker to business audiences anywhere at that time. And overnight, and all the work we did in consulting and speaking, and after that we did national conferences 3, 6, about 7 or 8 times over the next 10 years because of this one. It started and it spread. And all the consulting we did and all the other experience came because of that 2 minutes of reversing a reaction, which if I told you the story, you would say, well, that reaction was, what's wrong with that reaction? He deserved it. He was wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. The reaction is wrong. It doesn't matter how justified you are. The reaction is wrong. And when I later look back, at the time I didn't know. Of course, I noticed. You see, you asked me to offer gratitude, and now suddenly I'm going to the States, and they're paying us money, and we have this. I didn't know what was going to come of it. I didn't know that my whole career in business management was going to open up because of 2 minutes of gratitude for this man. So like that, I put an example in the story, not this example, but which is fully real to me because it's the same thing. In the story, Anya, the Russian girl, reverses her complaint against her old boss, and it opens up a great opportunity for them. In that sense, the story is fully realistic, at least to me. I wasn't just pulling things out of the hat because I know the power of that. So like that, behind every incident, there's an incident in the story where they almost get killed in a car accident when they're leaving the U.S. State Department. Came very close. Well, in 1987, I went to Europe with another Indian on some work, and Appa asked me, I won't spell it out too much detail, but he asked me to write and get an appointment with the head of an international commission on global development, which had been set up by the World Bank, and to meet the man who was the director of that commission in Geneva. I've never had an international meeting with somebody concerned with politics. The people on that commission were former heads of state. There was the chairman of the commission was the former chancellor of Germany, the U.S. Secretary of State, the top people, the highest level in the world these people came from. He's asked me to meet the director, who agreed to meet me. What am I going to tell him about? Appa gave me ideas that I could go. He was willing to meet. Well, we drove by car from Milan, Italy to Geneva for that meeting. And when I was coming out of the parking lot in Milan, exactly what I wrote in the novel, because of a block in the road and a wooden construction fence in the road, it wasn't clear which way the traffic was going. I turned the wrong way. A big bus came towards us at high speed, stopped just 2 inches away from smashing us to bits. And it's the closest I've ever come in my life to a physical finish. And at the time, I couldn't understand why this has happened. But 10 years, that man met us. That man asked for a report. That man remembered us, and we became in relation with him. And 10 years later, when we created, 12 years later, when we created the International Commission on Peace and Food, that was our most important supporter, who gave us legitimacy and support for what we did. 10 years, 12 years later, the initiative Appa took, the Cold War ended. When I look back on it and saw the power that was shown 12 years later was shown as a danger 12 years earlier because we weren't prepared. I was not prepared for it. So I showed the same incident, even what appears to be something fantastic, was based on a real life experience transposed. Then for any of you who have read the story of Ray Berger, one of the four, going to Chicago and a man being shot right outside his front door, named Berger, also, is a true story. It happened to me. Exactly the way it happened to me. The man's name was Jacobs. And it was also, as I've explained, or Dan explains to him in the story, Appa explained to me, and I understood why it happened to me the way it happened to him. So I just wanted to say, even if, from those things that look to be purely fiction, that you put in just to make some drama, they were all based on real incidents that told me how life worked, that taught me how life really works, and how to understand the correspondences in life and to reflect the realities of the life. So I think there's a lot of personal that anybody can get personally. I agree, the computer and artificial intelligence may not be in everybody's mind. Solving global problems may not be, but the discovery of the knowledge and the personal progress they make and the way they overcome obstacles, it's all the knowledge that Appa has been offering to us and we've all been trying to give. Put in a context where I hope that it could be accessible to people who don't have the advantages of knowing all that we have. Would anybody like to ask any question or anything about? I haven't gotten into the details of the story because I did too much to cover. But if anyone has something, I read something yesterday. By the way, Appa's, I think, read the novel 3 times. I've read the novel 10 times. And I used to feel foolish. I'm reading my own novel. and find it interesting. Sometimes I laugh, I cry when I read the novel. I said, I don't understand this. The novel I have written is somebody else can, how many times can I don't try to do it. I put it away. Oh, I know this story. I know it backwards and forwards. After all, I've written it. And then a year or two later, for some reason, I pick it up and I read it and I'm just fascinated by it. I never understood why until about a month ago. And then I got the secret. Appa told me once that memories of the past keep coming back. Anything and everything that happens to us happens for a reason, because there's something we should learn from it. And that learning is not just a mental understanding. We should learn it emotionally. We should learn it physically. It should become real experience to us. Mother says somewhere that the ordinary person in one birth has one experience over and over and over again to learn it. At least we know that Mrs. Bennett so far hasn't learned the lesson that she was supposed to learn from the 25 years of marriage, and we know she'll do the same thing the next time because she hasn't learned it, but she still has more time. We hope that she learns at least one lesson by the end of her life. And Mother also says that the conscious soul can learn a lifetime's worth of experience every year. And that's the significance of the birthday. The birthday can be a spiritual rebirth every year, equivalent to a whole lifetime. The more conscious you are, the more you learn out of your own experience. When you're unconscious, you need to repeat the experience over and over and over and over and over again before you learn it. And I think I've mentioned before, as an example of this, I've read Life Divine many times, especially the first book many times. Maybe about 10 years ago when I was reading, I got to the 10th chapter, and I saw a line where he says something like, the whole problem arises out of division. Oh, that's very important. Division. Yes, yes. The mind dividing reality is the whole source of the ignorance. Why didn't I understand that before? I wanted to underline it. And then I noticed it's already underlined. I've already underlined it, but only now I really understand the significance of it. Sometime later, I mean, 2 weeks later, I was going back to the earlier chapters. I went back to the first chapter, and I saw, hey, he said the same thing here. Then I went to the second chapter and the third chapter. I found in every chapter he's saying the same thing. And I've read those chapters so many times, only now I really understand, I think, what he meant. I needed to go through that experience so many times before it's not just a mental understanding, but before I began to, and I'm still understanding that, because it's an ultimate truth. So Appa once said, he discovered memories keep coming back to him of people that he knew 50 years ago, experience that happened when he was in college or when he was in a youngster or working and his family and everything. And he used to wonder why they come back. And he used to consecrate them each time a memory comes back. And each time it would reveal something that he hadn't understood before. And he discovered by experience that when he fully gets the knowledge from his past experience, that memory goes away. It never comes back to him again. Sometimes it comes back as a memory. Sometimes it comes back as a news about the person. Or the person comes. But once he has fully grasped what was intended to come to him from the experience, it's gone. So I realized why I keep reading the book. Because what I wrote, some kind of understanding 10 years ago about my previous 40 years of experience, is still not fully real to me. It may be real enough that I can explain it. Some things are more real than others. But when I really becomes full emotional and physical knowledge to me, in other words, when I really have fully understood everything that I've read and everything that I've learned and everything that Appa's told me and everything that I've experienced, I won't be able to open that book again. And I think I'm pretty sure I shared my dream with you, which was a kind of a joke. When I had come to Pandi and become a member of the ashram, and at that time we had access to Mother, at least we could write to her, and I told you, one day I had a dream that Mother told me so many important things, and when I woke up I couldn't remember what they were. And so I wrote a letter to Mother telling Mother, I had a dream of you and you told me very important things, but I can't remember. Please help me. And when the letter was given to Mother, she laughed. And when they came down and Mother gave flowers and blessings and everything, but she laughed. That was the response. I felt a little sorry. Why did Mother laugh? I wanted her to tell me. And then when I realized what the dream was really saying, I laughed. Because it means all the things she's told me, I have forgotten. It's not for her to tell me again. I must remember and make real what she's already told me. So in the book, for those of you who've read it, you know that one of the characteristics of the book was that when Dan starts reading it and paying attention to it, the pages begin to disappear. Well, that was I was trying to express something that's absolutely real to me. And that is, when we forget Mother, it looks like Mother has gone away. It's we who forget Mother. It's we who forget what's been told to us, what we have learned. We, all of us, if you've read Appa's books, there's nothing you need to know. But what's the difference between it? Do we remember it? Do we apply it to ourselves, or do we only apply it to other people? There's nothing. So I realized, so I put it in the book that way, that when Dan gets carried away with the work, he loses the knowledge by getting lost in the work to the point where it's threatened to disappear. It's very real to me because I know people for whom it has disappeared completely. I'm trying to avoid that. I'm trying to make it more and more real. But I know that the fact that my own book is interesting to me means all that I've heard, all that I've read, all that I've experienced, and that's important. I'm not just talking about we've read something. We've had such experience. All of us have had rich experiences. We forget the experience. We forget the value of the experience, or rather, we've never really fully assimilated it. It's never really changed our personality fully. And that is the adventure of consciousness and joy. That is the life divine. The life divine is to know that everything comes for our evolution of consciousness. As long as it only comes as an understanding or an information or a momentary, just because I saw the power of gratitude doesn't mean I'm feeling grateful every day for everything that happens. Just because I've seen the power of silent will or non-reaction or non-initiative doesn't mean I can practice it in all things. I've seen all those things many times. Great power, as you have all seen, the power of prayer, the power of remembrance, the power of consecration. But they will keep coming back to us until they change us, because that's what they're there for. So I just read a passage yesterday. I'm going to close with this, see if it makes, I'm taking it out of context, but see if this is written philosophically, not psychologically, but see, I'm sure you'll recognize the thought. I put it in the context of Dan trying to discover, one of my main characters, trying to make real in his own experience what's happening to him, as we all are. If life is a perfectly orchestrated cosmic dance, Nobody says that. Of course, the tradition says Leela, but what does it mean? God's having fun. A perfectly orchestrated cosmic dance. Everything is part of the dance. Then, every problem that comes to us from others is a reflection of a corresponding element in our own nature, without exception. Either something of the past that needs to be transformed, or something of the future that needs to be born. This is important because we think when a problem comes, we've done something wrong. Oh, it's our karma. Oh, you're saying that I have a problem, therefore I'm wrong and I'm low or something like that. Problems equally come to us because we need that problem to make a progress positive. Because there's a potential in us. India could become free only when, so why was India occupied by the British for so long? We can say it's a punishment, we can say it's karma, that doesn't explain. Because only the pressure of an arrogant, offensive, foreign power that thinks India is very inferior and they're very superior, only that humiliation is what we needed to discover our own greatness and our own strength and unite us. The world may say, oh, India is a slave country and they're that. That's one way of saying it. The other say, nature gave us the gift. Sri Aurobindo explains in Ideal of Unity, every Indian should read it, it's so inspiring. Nature is experimenting in India with a diversity and richness of civilization and culture that never has been done anywhere else. And the greatness of the experiment itself makes it most difficult to unite the country. Therefore, it needed the foreign occupation. So, is there something of the past that needs to be given up? Yes, we all have. Everything of the past needs to be given up to go to the future. Everything of the past. Or something of the future needs to be born. And that's the truth of life. That is the divine life. The divine life is coming in the future. Life is divine even now. It's divine in the sense that it's giving us exactly what we need to make us divine. The solution to any problem. I quoted directly one of Sri Aurobindo's aphorisms. God created the sense of sin that human beings could recognize the limitations of their own consciousness and overcome them. Man outsmarted God. He has employed the capacity to discover the sins of others rather than knowing it in himself. I'm sure it's familiar to all of us now. We're very good at that. We're trained to do that. Whenever anything happens, we immediately say, that man came, this person did, that did this. We are so trained to find somebody to blame and leave our ego in safe. So then I wrote, this was a cosmic humor. There was a cosmic humor in that thought, which was liberating. Dan is reading that aphorism. It gave Dan the freedom to laugh at his own folly. Because he's looking and blaming all the people who are giving trouble to him. And now this gave him the freedom to laugh at himself. The solution to any problem lies not in changing others or waiting for them to change, but rather by changing the corresponding element in oneself that attracted or created, sanctioned or necessitated the problem in the first place. For every external force, influence, or event that impinges in our lives, on our lives, there must be a corresponding inner supporting element. The solution lies in finding and reversing that, not making others change. What comes from outside comes with a mission and a purpose, regardless of the conscious intention that motivates others. Now, I'm sure you will all agree you've heard this thought before. You know it, you've heard it, you've read it, you've probably advised other people that way too. But can we live it every minute? Can we make it the living? So I put it in the case of a story. It comes to liberate us. Whatever comes, comes not to abuse us, not to accuse us, not to punish us. It comes to liberate us from our own limitations, to help us become more perfect in our own consciousness. So I tried to make the story, they're discovering this. They're discovering it in their own experience. And trying to, and how when they, each time they make the discovery, their life expands and opens up new opportunities. The problem becomes an opportunity. So that's my brief introduction to the story.
So thank you, sir, for your valuable introduction to the book. So the topics were, the book was alien to us in the sense the terms used in the book, like the artificial intelligence and other technical terms, were little scant to attempt the book. And the concept mixed with that is the life divine and the past concepts. Actually, so we were really not in a position to attempt the book earlier. So your introduction gave us the strength to attempt it, sir.